That, let me introduce Mark. Mark is a graduate, Rutgers College of Engineering. He's a licensed PE in 11 states, fortunately one of which is New Jersey. He's also a professional planner, certified public works manager, and a certified floodplain manager. He's got 26 years experience in civil and site engineering, and he's been working with the borough for 20 years. So he knows us, he knows our issues. He was just telling me, he thinks of things by streets and what projects he's done. That's where he knows where things are. He's also president of DeBlasio and Associates. So Mark, thank you very much. Welcome, Mark, please.
I'd like to thank everyone for being afforded the opportunity to make this presentation, and I know what they mean when they say stage fright. So, the borough's flood mitigation and storm sewer master plan originated in the borough's flood mitigation committee, was refined over several years, and was finalized through a peer review consisting of Stockton University, the Wetlands Institute, and a representative of SHPOA. Subsequently, the master plan was recommended by the planning board in February and adopted by Borough Council in April of this year. I will start the presentation. This first slide is an executive summary of the recommended capital improvements. You'll see at the end of the presentation there were 3 categories of recommendations. This one is important because these recommendations are things that you will see cost money and affect budgeting. Just to run you through that, the priority 1 improvements between now and the next 10 years are the replacement of borough and bulkheads, beach outfall elimination, 93rd Street Storm Sewer Pump Station, 80th Street Bay Marina improvements, investment in the permeable pavements in appropriate areas of the borough, replacement of privately owned bulkheads, elevate private property roadways, advanced flood warning signs and siren upgrades, Bayside tidal control on 96th Street North, 83rd Street Storm Sewer Pump Station, and just general yearly storm sewer improvements. Based on today's values, we had estimated all that work to be at about $42.5 million over a 10-year period, which is about $4.3 million a year for budgeting purposes. As part of putting together the flood master plan, we need to assess our existing conditions and existing inventory. What you see here is a cross-section profile of 86th Street, and what it shows is what we probably all inherently know, is that the left side of this slide represents the bayfront, the right side is the beach, and as you can see in this case here, which is the trend to the borough, 86th Street is lower on the bay side and increases in elevation. Put that into perspective as we look at tidal data that was taken from the USGS tide gauge off in Stone Harbor. On 96th Street, that red line represents the highest tide that was recorded at that gauge, which was elevation 6.73, and as you can see, it affected the borough up until about 2nd Avenue. So this was just quantitatively depicting what we know. The next thing we had to take a look at was sea level rise. This slide has 2 graphs on it. The top graph is a NOAA slide, so that slide represents actual data. That tells us that data that's been logged since 1965 does show that we have sea level rise. It's actual collected data. The graph or the table below that is actually from Rutgers University. That's representative of theoretical or projected. And what Rutgers had recommended, which was put into our recommendation in the flood master plan, was to look at the 17% chance likely range of sea level rise. To put that in perspective, by 2050, that would be a sea level rise of 2.1. So what that means is that any designs that we do, or planning that we do, we should take that into account and add 2.1 feet to those scenarios. The next couple of slides are what we're going to call the fun slides. This represents a map utilizing Cape May County LIDAR data and data that our office has collected over the years. In this case here, what you see in red is tidal flooding from elevation 4 and below. And no surprise here that you can see from about 93rd Street down to the borough municipal boundary on the bay side, we have flooding of 3rd Avenue West. As the tide increases, it comes up to elevation 5. You can see that it gets worse. So elevation 4 and 5 is in that nuisance flooding range. The next graph represents elevation 6. Hopefully we won't see this much often. This is like Hurricane Sandy, Jonas type levels, but as you can see, that's we flooded when the tide reached elevation 6. Next thing we took a look at is, as you may be aware, the borough had adopted a new bulkhead ordinance requiring the raising of the bulkhead up to elevation 8 on a tiered time frame. Richard Stockton University completed a bulkhead study. As part of that study, we had to analyze how many bulkheads complied with the proposed ordinance. There were over 800 data points collected, and what that showed us was that approximately 5% met the elevation requirements. That data was collected, I believe, in 17 or 18, so it has improved. I think we have had about 50 bulkheads plus or minus replaced, so those numbers have gotten better, but that gave us an indication of how that ordinance was going to impact people, where we stood at that time. Okay, these next slides are NOAA-assisted slides that I think are really instrumental in explaining tidal and nuisance flooding. I know as engineers we get very technical, so we try to break this down in a simple format. So this slide represents a sunny day, low tide, everything is well in the borough. Then what happens is the tide rises, and as you can see, the sun is still out. It's a normal day. What you are seeing now is what's called a hydrostatic paradox. Simply stated, water seeks its own level. So the piping that is in the roadway, which is used for conveyance of surface water that hits the road, actually in this case here becomes a conduit for that hydrostatic paradox, and that water level in the street will be the same water level in the bay. So as you can see in that situation, regardless of how high a bulkhead is, it could be elevation 10, it could be 1,000 feet up in the air, the flooding condition is still the same. So that tells us, which we currently know, is that we need to restrict or eliminate the tide from coming up through that pipe. Further exacerbating that situation is you have a high tide and then it rains. Further exacerbation of that situation is high tide, rain, and then you have wind action pushing water into the bay and not allowing water to recede. And then you have storm surge, all bets are off. So when we analyze how to combat that situation, we have recommended tide control valve in that pipe, and what that does is that restricts that water from coming back up through the pipe. So in a very realistic situation here, we have a street elevation of 4, where the car is. We have a fully conforming bulkhead at 8. We have a properly operating tide control valve, and say a water level, which was Hurricane Sandy level at 6.73. As you can see, with a properly functioning valve, the road will not flood. So that's good. When you look at that scenario compared to the earlier slide, you see the impact that that has. Now, here's the disadvantage of just having the valve in place. You have a high bay tidal water, the valve is functioning, and now you have rain. As the rain hits the roads, enters into the storm sewer system, it becomes essentially a storage basin. And as those pipes fill up, they have reached capacity, they breach and they flood. So this is a scenario that is not ideal as well. Better than just having flood water in, but not totally superior to the solution. So how would we address that? Well, we had recommended that the borough explore installing pump stations. What the pump station does is it functions to restrict the tide from coming up through the storm sewer pipe, but has the ability to pump the water out from the streets and landward of the bulkhead. So again, in this scenario, you get the full benefit of that elevation 8 of the bulkhead. That pump station evacuates the rainwater and keeps the tide from coming in. And again, of course, if we reach elevation 8, hopefully we're not even on the island at that point. So just in summary, there were 3 recommendation categories. Preventative, Part A, that was to continue to enforce and monitor the bulkhead ordinance. Number 2, continue to enforce and monitor the lock rating and draining ordinance. 3, initiate discussions with the Borough of Avalon and Cape May County regarding regional flooding mitigation improvements and implementation. Water does not know municipal boundaries, so we could have the best plan in the world, spend a lot of money, and water could just come through Avalon and 3rd Avenue. So I think it's very important that those discussions happen on a regional approach. I think there might be some bulkheading along 3rd Avenue and Avalon, but that doesn't exist. The capital infrastructure B, that was that original slide. Elevate borough bulkheads, select Bayside tide control method, initiate and conduct public outreach relating to raising roadways, implement recommendations contained in the flood mitigation and storm sewer master plan, current capital improvement projects, properly plan future projects in concert with the flood mitigation and storm sewer municipal master plan. And last, C, the preservation of natural resources in cooperation with regulatory agencies. That includes continue to monitor and survey the beaches, Back Bay, and dunes. Continue to participate in the New Jersey Coastal Coalition, which is a very important organization where there's a lot of collaboration, and essentially just keep your head up and on the ball. Again, just to finalize, the master plan is a fluid document. It should be revisited periodically as technologies improve and policies are adopted.
Thank you.